Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session of Meet the Members of Empower Africa. I'm excited and honored to be your host for this terrific podcast. My name is Shai Bernstein. I'm VP of Biz Development and Partnerships at Empower Africa. And we're going to have one of these podcasts every Monday at 5 p.m. CAT, also known as GMT plus 2, also known as IDT, and many other acronyms. Before I present our distinguished guest, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Empower Africa is a business community with a mission to drive investment, trade, and job creation in Africa. We believe in trade over aid and that business is the best way to build things and make a difference. We have three verticals of the company. The first is the Empower Africa Business Network, the second, events and trade missions, and the third, consulting and project facilitation. We believe in bringing good people together. We believe in the power of synergy, and our community is an invite-only paid membership. We want to make sure that we have good and honest people who can add tremendous value to each other. Our goal is to really create connections, optimize the communication, and maximize on all the collaboration that can be done. The business community brings together SMEs, startups, investors, banks, PEs, VCs, and so on, governments, multinational enterprises, all to one place. Speaking of bringing good people together, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our guest for today, Kim Troy, CEO of Civilis. Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm
Of
thrilled.
course, of course. So, please, Kim, tell us about yourself. Tell us about the company.
All right. Okay, so about me, I'm an American. I was born in the beautiful state of Washington and grew up there for the first 18, 19 years of my life. And if you've never been, I highly recommend it. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world, the Pacific
Wow.
Northwest. Lots of mountains and water, and it's just gorgeous there. I have lived all over the US, though. I've called many places home. I've lived in Seattle, Dallas, Chicago, and now I live in a rural area outside of Columbus, Ohio. I have some beautiful property there, and it kind of scratches my itch to be in the outdoors and to be out in nature. And as you learn about me and you get to know me, you'll understand that the outdoors and nature is something that's particularly important to me, and it's a passion of mine. And it sort of has a theme that runs through my life and my career, even. So that's me. My career began back in the mid 80s, which gives you an idea of my age. But I started my career working at multi billion-dollar retail corporations. And I've held executive positions in sales management, human resources, operations, in that very large corporate environment. And I was in that role for about 20 years total. And then in 1998, I took my first trip ever to the continent of Africa. It was to celebrate our 10-year wedding anniversary. And we went to Zimbabwe on a walking safari. And I have to say that I was smitten with Zimbabwe, with the wildlife, with the people, and just generally with the continent. It was a kind of a bucket list item back then. It was a bucket list item of mine to go to Africa and go on some kind of immersive safari experience. Again, back to that whole thing about, loving nature, loving wildlife, and wanting to, be in the outdoors. And certainly Africa, especially that part of Africa, held this mystique for me as a child. And then growing up, was enamored with Jane Goodall and Born Free and all of those things back in the days that were very attractive to a young girl growing up. So anyhow, when I went to take that walking safari, we were immersed in the bush for 3 weeks. It was extremely transformative for me in a lot of ways. For me, just personally, like I said, it was a bucket list item, but also, I became really enamored with the people there and with what I saw were a lot of opportunities
Right.
economically to be able to grow, grow the economy and grow some self-sufficiency among the people. So um, I came back to work and went back to my regular corporate job and started feeling this weird kind of disconnect. I'd go back to work and feel like what I was doing here in the U.S. wasn't really all that meaningful, and so I made arrangements to go back several times subsequently over the ensuing next 3 years. I went back and would go to volunteer on projects that were usually they were conservation oriented projects, but I would go and started meeting people and started to learn more about how things
Right.
worked
Right.
there. Certainly, my first 3 weeks in the bush wasn't necessarily all that. That was just kind of gave me a little taste. But when I was able to go back and spend time meeting people, understanding a lot of the unique idiosyncrasies, the multicultural aspects of what goes on and how people communicate, how they work together or sometimes don't work together. So so I became very enamored with that whole environment and ultimately ended up leaving my career so that I could go back there and start working as a
Wow.
consultant to help these organizations build capacity, mostly around my areas of expertise, which were mostly around operational capacity and human
Wow.
resources capacity. So I would work with them for 3-4 months at a time. We would build strategic plans. I'd work with the board members. I'd work with the individuals that were leading the organization on site, and we would put just some infrastructure in place, some operational and people infrastructure in place to make sure that the organization could continue to grow.
Right.
So that was something that eventually led to my business that I have today, which is Civilis Consulting. We work now with for-profit, not-for-profit
Hmm.
organizations in the U.S. Our last assignment in Africa was in Botswana, where we did some strategic planning
Right.
work for um, cheetah conservation, Botswana, and that was anyhow. So that was a few years back, but we now do the same kind of work for profit organizations all over North America, as well as you know, uh, right right here in my hometown in Columbus,
Right.
Ohio, but throughout North America.
Wow. First of all,
So
yeah,
yeah,
no, so,
that's
so,
kind
so
of
just
our
before you continue about that, because I have a few questions on that, I just want to share with you, just talking about Seattle and about Washington State, um,
yeah.
gives me good vibes. I love the mountains in general. I love nature in general. You mentioned the
Yeah,
mountains and the water, and I was like, oh my God, it's incredible. Um, and
yeah,
also,
yeah.
you mentioned that you really were in a number of different cities, right? In Dallas and Seattle and so on. And I could
Mhm.
say Chicago, right? I could tell you that
Yeah,
for me growing
yeah.
up, I was born in New York, and both my parents, born
Oh,
and raised in the Bronx in New York. And they told me growing up, I remember that I once took, I don't know if I told you this, by the way, I did like a tour guiding
I
course,
don't think so.
and I was a tour guide for a bit. And I took a group, yeah,
No.
and I took a group, a school from Denver, Colorado, and I told my parents, what do they put in the water? These kids are the nicest kids. Everyone is just so nice. So my parents said to me again, both from New
Yeah,
York, said to me, the further away you get from New York, the nicer the people.
it is true. Well, you can't get much further than
Right,
Seattle from New York,
right,
right? But it is true. I mean, having spent a lot of time in big cities, living, working in big cities, traveling. I mean, I've traveled extensively all over the
right,
U.S. certainly, and as well as internationally. But But yeah, that is so true that that said, anyhow, I'm not disparaging New
Right.
York by any means because it has its own vibe and its own personality, and you definitely have to appreciate that. But it's true. People do tend to get really nice, and honestly, the more uh, the more in the Midwest that you get, there's sort of a Midwest
Yeah,
mentality in
definitely. Right.
particular that is very, and that's why one of the reasons why I love Chicago so much is because it's a really big city, but it still has that Midwest mentality. And people are nice there. I mean,
Yeah.
they'll say hi, they'll look
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
you when you're walking down the street, even in the
100%.
city. And anyhow, it's a nice,
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
it's lovely.
Definitely. And I also wanted to ask, I see that you are make it the exact title, you're a Forbes Business Council member. Could you
Yeah.
elaborate on that? What does
Yes.
that mean? That sounds
So,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. So similarly, you have to be invited to be a member, and it's a member of thought leaders in business that we get together on a regular basis as a council, as a group. We have sort of subgroups, but it's an organization not unlike Empower Africa, actually, where it's just a group of like-minded business leaders that get together. We have presentations, and there's subgroups where we have special interests, where we get together and just share best practices and learn from each other. And then we also publish articles on the Forbes platform, so it's a nice publishing opportunity to kind of get our names out there and position our point of view, be able to position ourselves and position our companies in a way that is, that's resonant
Yeah.
with our own beliefs and our own interests. So
Right. Right.
it's a it's a nice opportunity, like I said, to learn from your peers and learn, best practices and what works and what doesn't.
100%. 100%. And so, could you share a little bit more, just on the type of projects that you've done the past few years? Maybe a specific,
Hmm.
case study that comes to mind you'd like to share.
Hmm. Yeah. So, oh my gosh. Yeah, so one in particular that comes to mind is a project that a company we're working with right now. We've been with them, we've been working with them for a couple of years now. That it's an e-commerce company. They're an e-commerce company and a manufacturing company. They do both. They sell the stuff that they make, and it's a started out as a relatively small business that was founded by an
Right.
entrepreneur who just had an idea. He was working in his, working at home in his basement, and he's like, I need to make these. It's a pinnable map company. They create maps, travel maps, and they're like cork backed, and so you can pin your travel experience. Wherever you've been. Pretty simple product, relatively simple to make, or at least back then when he first started. But he had this idea that he wanted to have a product that he couldn't find anywhere online, and so he started in his basement and started developing this. Eventually, he got a place where he started mass manufacturing these. They're all still handmade. But his challenge was that his business had grown very
Hmm.
organically, and honestly not with the end in
Right.
mind. His business had just grown just with
Right.
just with his couple of employees, which were really his friends, that they started out in his basement, and then the next thing he knows, he's got this legit business that where people are really placing orders online, and he's getting to that point where he's not able to fulfill all the orders, and things are
Right.
starting to kind of break. And so that's when he brought us in. He brought us in to help him with the operations aspect of his business initially, which was where this happens a lot, where there's an initial problem in the business that is starting to break or starting to impede the business's growth. And so that's usually where we come in into an engagement with a company. But then once we're there, we start to see that there are other aspects of the company that are 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 also in need of some, overhaul or some guidance. And so, when you approach an operational assignment, the first thing that you think of is, okay, well, we need to make this process
Right.
more efficient. We need to configure the manufacturing floor. We need to get some different equipment. We need to consider where we're sourcing our materials. Are we sourcing the
Right.
materials from the right
Right.
place? Are we going to get do we have a fulfillment problem? So we start evaluating a lot of those things. And but then eventually we understand, everybody starts to understand that, all right, but the people are still making these
Right.
processes. This is, are still making these material, the products, and they still have to follow these processes. This is not a completely automated environment where machines just put this stuff together. So we still have to have
Right.
people involved in this operational process. And then we understand what we need to do with the people, and we need to evaluate what
Right.
their roles are, and relook at job descriptions, and how we hire and who we hire, and how we train them, and how we keep them motivated, and things
Right.
like that. So our work usually is to go into a project or into a business and work with the owner or the founder on the most proximate problem that they have. But once we're, like I said, once we're engaged, then we start to understand the ultimate problems within the organization, and we help them fix those parts
Right.
too. I will say that uh, their growth has been pretty phenomenal since we started working with them, and they will tell you that a large part of our work with them is they can attribute that growth to our work with them. But they grew about 50% over last
Wow.
year, this last year, yeah, in
Wow.
2020. And then they're on track to grow about 70% over that year, over 2020 this
Wow.
year. So they have this nice little hockey stick that's going on right now, which we're very happy to see. So that's an example of a current project that we have. Um, I could go on there, but again, what I will say is we had a goal when COVID happened back in March of 2020. We had a goal at that time that we were not going to let any of our clients go out of business. And in some cases, depending on what we were doing for them, we might have been doing marketing work for them, but we had to pivot our
Right.
work with them to address whatever the most urgent issue
Right.
was to keep them in business. That could have been sales, or that could have been on the operational side, or fulfillment, or whatever. So we made a goal as soon as it happened, and when everything got really weird, we contacted all of our clients. We said, look, whatever we need to do, we're your partner in this. We're going to make sure that you stay in business, because we knew we had to stay in we needed to stay in business. We had to keep our clients in business. And so we contacted every single one of our clients individually and said, look, we're going, forget what we're doing now. It may or may not be relevant, actually, based on the most urgent crisis of the
Right.
day. So let's put a new plan in place. Let's figure out how we can make sure that we pivot our relationship with you to help you, you know,
Right.
win
Right.
and thrive during this
Right.
time, and not go out of business. And I'm really proud to say that we didn't have anybody over 2020 go out of business. And in fact, like this map company is a really great example of where they did really well throughout
Wow.
2020. So I'm really proud of that as well.
Fantastic. That's great. That's great. And I also
Yeah.
know that you mentioned in one of our conversations that you also looking to expand, to Zambia, Uganda, Rwanda, Namibia, right?
Mhm. Yes. Yes. So let's talk. So let me talk about that for a second, because one of the things I will tell you is that I'm particularly passionate about women-led organizations. Not that, you know, I, it matters, right? I mean, a business needs us, a business needs us. But I'm particularly passionate about women-led organizations, and I'm particularly passionate about uh, uh, Southern Africa, and I have this personal interest in West Africa, but I have not spent any time there. All my experience in Africa has primarily been in Southern Africa, a little bit in Tanzania, but primarily in South
Right.
Africa, Namibia, Botswana, um, uh,
Right.
Zimbabwe as well. So what I find is that I think that there are opportunities there to empower women to be more economically self-sufficient, and that's a passion of mine. That's an area that I'm particularly um, drawn to, and I think that I have a point of view about that can be beneficial. So that's why my interest in female-led organizations, and then my interest in Africa, Southern Africa, and West Africa.
Wow, that's great. That's great. I find that one of the biggest. I remember the first time I visited rural Africa, and
Hmm.
I couldn't. It was hard for me to just grasp the dissonance and the gap between how you and I
Right.
live our lives on a day-to-day basis, with the small things
Yeah.
that anybody who lives in the U.S., Israel, or the U.K. Takes for granted, right? And I'm not
Yeah.
even talking about, of course, the extreme poverty situation in terms of running water and the basic diet.
Right.
But even when you're looking at the more wealthier areas or the more developed areas, so to speak, um, just the infrastructure from a business perspective are just, it's such
Right.
a, and of course, a lot of it is internet connectivity and, an infrastructure that relies
Hmm.
on, years and years beforehand. But
Hmm.
I just remember
Yeah.
it. I was amazed at how, this whole, I'm making a big generalization here, right? But
Yeah.
most
As
people,
yes, as all
yeah,
of us
but,
do.
but most people, including me, up until a few years ago when I joined Africa, we look at Africa as a country instead of a continent with 54 countries,
Right.
and the
Right.
potential that is already there and is already happening with
Oh my
different
God.
SMEs,
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
startups, innovation, entrepreneurs. It's tremendous.
Yeah.
And, to think about the ecosystem that someone like me has in Israel with the high tech ecosystem, or in New York, Silicon Valley, and London, right? And then you think about what these
Right.
incredible entrepreneurs have there, right? And it's just a quick search on the internet to look at the companies that are really growing there. It's tremendous. I think it's
Yeah.
amazing.
I think that compared to what how we grow up and how we learn to do business. I think that there's a much greater resourcefulness and creative problem solving that occurs in 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 areas where you don't have a lot of things just readily available
Right.
to you. And so that create that so I just find, and again, I'm not saying that, I understand every country is different, but in general, at least the places where I've visited on the African continent, the individuals there are incredibly resourceful. They are very innovative in their approach to solving problems. And they're also very much about win win solutions, which is something that I find it's one of my frustrations about, about the US in particular, is that US tends to be very competitive and very much, and again, I'm generalizing, but very much about win lose. It's very, so somebody's got to lose so that somebody else
Right.
can
Right.
win. And I don't, I feel like that life doesn't have to be like that. And that there's enough to go around. And of all places in well to do countries like the US that has all these resources, there's no need to be so competitive and so much
Right.
about this zero sum
Right.
game. And so I it's that dissonance again that I would feel when I would go to Africa, spend months at a time there, work alongside people
Yeah.
coming up with really creative solutions, and then come back to the US and find that people were focused on the wrong stuff and just kind of had the wrong approach and the wrong attitude. And so that's something about the places that I have visited in on the African continent that I find very inspiring. And I think it's just a matter of providing just a tiny bit more resources, a little bit more guidance. And this is these are places that are just ready to flourish. So I'm very excited to be, to whatever degree I can be part of that
Right.
success in
100%.
Africa. That's my interest and passion. So it's fun to be able to work with people who are making things
Right.
happen with very
Right.
little at their disposal. So,
Wow. Great.
yeah.
Great. So,
Yeah.
before we wrap it up, and as you know, we have a tradition of sharing a quote, a specific quote. Is there anything else? Is there
Yeah.
anything else you'd like to just mention or discuss?
Um, I don't think so. Other than, like I said, I think that this these opportunities I just want to say, I mean, I love the Empower Africa network and concept. I very much am a believer, always have been, in trade not aid. Again, I don't think that this is, you know uh, again, our Western world has often been about charity, and I'm not disparaging that by any means, but I very much believe that this is a very these are very capable people with lots of opportunity. If we can, we just need to open the
Yeah.
doors and allow these people to flourish. So I really love what Empower Africa represents and what it's all about. So thank you for making this happen, because I think it's been so needed. And back when I was doing this on my own, um, that was always, again, I would tell people, oh, I'm going over and I'm doing these things, I'm doing these projects, and they would immediately think that it was some sort of charitable
Right.
thing that I was working on. And because that is the mindset, that's the mentality. So I really appreciate the underlying mission here, and that we're here to again provide to help with economic opportunities so that everybody can win.
Yes.
We don't have to have somebody winning, so and somebody else losing.
100%.
So thanks. I
100%.
appreciate that.
100%. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we're going to do a lot of great things together with God's help.
Yeah.
Yeah, please share with us a quote or saying that you feel connected to,
Yeah.
inspired by, and so on.
Right. So this might be, one you've heard before. I don't know, but mine is, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." It's a Gandhi
Beautiful.
quote, and that is something that I think I would say I've lived by my whole life, even even before I heard that particular quote. But I really feel like, as long as we have resources, as long as we have able bodies and able minds that that we have a responsibility to act. And I'm very much a take charge kind of person. And whatever, in fact, sometimes to a fault, if I see a problem, I feel compelled to fix it. That works when you're in the consulting world, but sometimes sometimes one overcommits. But nonetheless, I feel like, that's our responsibility when we have, if we have resources at our disposal, if we have um, the ability to affect change for the good and to make the world a better place or to make our communities a better place, then it's really our responsibility to do something with that. So that you must be the change you wish to see in the world is something that I've always lived my life by. And I think, it's kind of karmic in that, what you put out
Wow.
there kind of comes back to
Wow.
you in some way. So anyhow, that's very, uh, yeah,
Wow.
that's my quote.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. And let's end by saying that we should be so lucky, even though it's not luck. A lot of it is, of course, grit and hard work. But we should be so
Mhm,
fortunate
mhm.
to, live that saying, and be that quote.
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes,
Great.
definitely.
Kim, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe and healthy,
Thank you.
and happy
Okay.
Easter if you're celebrating.
Yeah. Yes. Thank
All right,
you.
great.
Yeah.
Good to see you. We'll talk
Good.
soon. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Talk to you
Bye. Bye.
later. Bye.